How can 12 jurors look at the exact same 10 seconds of surveillance footage and see two completely different crimes? In a Texas courtroom right now, prosecutors have just dropped the definitive video of the moment 17-year-old Austin Metcalf was fatally stabbed under a team tent at a high school track meet. But depending on which attorney is speaking, that footage either seals a life sentence or proves complete innocence. The defendant's own words were captured on a live police body camera, seconds after the blade was dropped. The defense says the state is hiding the real story. A violent physical attack from a football player who outweighed their client by more than 60 pounds. The prosecution says those body camera statements are a confession hiding in plain sight. One stabbing, one piece of footage. Two radically different versions of the truth. And by the time you hear both sides of this story, you are going to have to decide which version you believe, because honestly, after spending weeks going through every piece of evidence in this case, I am still not sure the answer is as simple as anyone wants it to be. This is Beyond the Verdict. We do not stop at the headlines, and we do not hand you easy answers. If you want full breakdowns of the most complex criminal cases happening right now, subscribe to this channel immediately, because coverage like this is exactly what we do every single week. Now let me take you back to the morning everything went wrong. April 2nd, 2025 started the way every high school track meet in suburban Texas starts. It was a Thursday, the kind of perfectly ordinary weekday morning where the biggest concern for most families was whether their kid remembered to pack the right pair of running shoes. David Kuykendall Stadium in Frisco, Texas, was filling up the way it always does for district track events. Hundreds of student athletes from multiple Frisco ISD schools filtered through the gates in warm-up gear, earbuds in, stretching on the infield grass, joking with teammates while coaches walked the perimeter with clipboards and stopwatches. Parents were scattered across the metal bleachers. Some had coffee. Most had their phones out, camera apps already open, ready to record the moment their kid hit the starting blocks. The energy was exactly what you would expect. Relaxed, communal, routine. The kind of morning that fills up a family camera roll with blurry action shots and group photos that nobody looks at until years later when they suddenly mean everything. Nobody at that stadium had any reason to believe they were walking into the worst day of their lives. Austin Metcalf was there that morning. He was 17 years old, a junior at Memorial High School. A varsity football player built the way Texas high school football players tend to be built. Big, physical, the kind of presence that stands out in a crowd of teenagers. But the detail about Austin that matters most in this story is not his size or his sport. It is the fact that he was a twin. His brother Hunter was right there beside him, the way he always was. If you have ever known twins or been close to a set of twins, you understand that the bond is not just sibling closeness. It is something deeper, something almost cellular. Austin and Hunter shared a life in the way that only twins can. Same school, same team, same morning, same tent. That last detail is the one that will haunt Hunter Metcalf for the rest of his life. Karmelo Anthony was also 17. He was a student at Centennial High School, a rival school in the same Frisco ISD district. He was at the same stadium that morning representing his own school at the same track meet. In the world of Texas high school athletics, rival schools cross paths constantly. District meets, playoff brackets, off-season camps. These kids exist in the same competitive ecosystem, and they know each other by reputation, even when they do not know each other personally. On any other Thursday, Austin Metcalf and Karmelo Anthony would have occupied the same stadium without ever exchanging a single word. Their paths would have run parallel the way they had dozens of times before. But April 2nd was not any other Thursday, and what happened when those two paths finally intersected would leave one of them dead on a wet rubber track, and the other in handcuffs before the morning was over. The weather changed first. If you have ever lived in North Texas, you know exactly how fast the sky can turn. One moment it is overcast and manageable. The next moment the wind hits you sideways and the clouds go from gray to almost black in a matter of minutes. On that Thursday morning, a severe thunderstorm dropped onto Frisco with almost no warning. The wind picked up hard, the temperature shifted, and then the rain came down in sheets, the kind of heavy driving downpour that soaks you to the bone in seconds. Track meets do not cancel for weather, they delay. Officials pull the athletes off the field, and everyone waits it out. So instead of packing up and heading to their cars, hundreds of teenagers scrambled across the open stadium looking for shelter. They ran for the nearest covered structure they could reach because standing in the middle of a lightning-producing thunderstorm on an open athletic field is not an option. You have seen these at every outdoor sporting event. Basic canvas tops stretched over 4 metal legs. They are designed to hold a cooler and a few bags and give a team a home base. They are not designed to shelter dozens of students during a severe storm. But when the rain hit, that is exactly what they became. Within minutes, the entire atmosphere of that stadium transformed. The wide-open communal sporting event where everyone had space and air and room to breathe, compressed into a series of tiny crowded shelters, packed with teenagers, standing shoulder to shoulder. The rain was hammering against the canvas overhead so loud you had to shout to be heard. Kids were pressed against each other, voices overlapping, the casual energy of 30 minutes ago, replaced by something tight and uncomfortable, and charged with the kind of tension that builds when too many people are crammed into too small a space with nowhere to go. Under the Memorial High School team tent, that compression reached its breaking point. The tent was filled with Memorial athletes. It was their designated area, their spot, their gear underneath it. But sitting among them on the metal bleachers beneath the canopy was a student who did not belong to their school. Karmelo Anthony from Centennial High was seated there with his backpack resting on his lap. He was alone, surrounded by athletes from a rival school, trying to stay dry the same as everyone else. I need you to understand the physical geography of this space, because it becomes critical to everything that follows. The metal bleachers were directly behind Karmelo. The tent canopy was overhead. In front of him and on both sides was a dense crowd of Memorial students. Beyond them was the storm. There was no open corridor, no clear path to simply stand up and walk casually to another location. The space was boxed in by structure on one side and weather on the other. That said, the prosecution would later argue that other sheltered areas existed, that Karmelo's own team tent was elsewhere in the stadium, that his presence under the memorial canopy was not a matter of desperate necessity, but a conscious choice. This is the first of many moments in this case where the same physical reality gets interpreted in 2 completely different ways depending on who is presenting it. Memorial students started noticing the outsider. In the world of high school athletics, team spaces are territorial. That might sound trivial from an adult perspective, but to teenagers in a competitive environment, it is real, and it matters. The tent was their area. Their teammates were standing out in the rain, while a kid from another school occupied a dry seat. The looks started first. Sideways glances, whispered comments, the kind of low-level social signaling that precedes every confrontation in every high school in America. Then the words started. Austin Metcalf and his twin brother Hunter were among the Memorial students who approached Karmelo directly. The message was not subtle. He needed to leave. This was not his space. His team was somewhere else. What happened over the next 2 minutes became the subject of extensive witness testimony during the trial. Multiple witnesses, fellow students who were standing under or near that tent, testified that Karmelo was asked to leave the memorial area repeatedly. The number cited by witnesses went as high as 15 separate times. 15 times he was told to get up and go, and 15 times he stayed seated with his hands near or inside his backpack on his lap. 2 minutes does not sound like a long time. Say it out loud, 2 minutes. It sounds brief and manageable, but put yourself under that tent. You are surrounded by hostile strangers. The rain is deafening against the canvas above your head. People are shouting at you to move. More students are turning around to watch. The crowd is forming that invisible ring that always forms around a confrontation, the kind that makes backing down feel impossible, because suddenly everyone is watching, and the social cost of showing weakness in front of a crowd of teenagers is something that adults consistently underestimate. The pressure in that space was compounding by the second, and neither side was willing to release it. According to witness testimony presented during the trial, Karmelo made a statement during this verbal exchange that would later become one of the prosecution's most critical pieces of evidence. Witnesses reported that when Austin told him to leave in more forceful terms, Karmelo looked back at him and said something to the effect of "touch me," and find out. Other witnesses described the phrase as "punch me and see what happens." When I first read those words in the court reporting, I stopped, because those words change the texture of everything that comes before and after them. The prosecution would later argue, those words are not defensive. They are not the language of someone who is scared and trying to de-escalate. They are the language of someone drawing a line and daring another person to cross it. Someone who already knows what is going to happen if that line gets crossed, because they have already prepared for it. The defense would argue the exact opposite, that a teenager surrounded by 15 or more hostile students from a rival school, trapped in a physical space with no clear exit, saying something aggressive is not evidence of premeditation. It is evidence of fear masked as bravado, the kind of verbal boundary setting that a scared kid resorts to when distance and escape are not available options. Both interpretations are plausible, and the jury had to decide which one they believed. Then the physical line was crossed. Exactly who initiated the first physical contact remains one of the most hotly contested facts in this entire case. The defense maintained that Austin Metcalf, who was significantly larger than Karmelo, made physical contact first. A shove, a grab. The accounts vary depending on which witness is speaking and where they were standing in the crowd. The prosecution argued the surveillance footage tells a different story about the sequence, but the camera angle, the crowd density, and the video quality all created enough visual noise that neither side could point to a single frame and say with absolute certainty, this is the moment, and this is who moved first. What is not contested by either side is what happened next. Within seconds of the physical contact beginning, Karmelo Anthony produced a knife from his backpack. It was a 3.5-inch folding knife. In the chaos and noise and rain and screaming, surrounded by panicking teenagers in a space barely large enough for half of them, he used it. A single strike, one motion. It connected with Austin Metcalf's chest. The speed of it is what haunts this case. It was so fast that most of the students standing just feet away did not immediately understand that a weapon had been used. Several witnesses testified they thought it was a hard punch, a shove that landed wrong. The kind of physical contact that happens in high school, fights every single day across this country, without anyone dying. But Austin Metcalf fell to the ground, and in that moment, the air under that tent changed in a way that every single person who was there will carry for the rest of their lives. Kids started screaming. Some ran into the rain without looking back. Others froze in place, unable to process what they had just seen. Austin was on the ground, on the wet rubber track surface, bleeding, and his twin brother Hunter was right there beside him, not across the stadium, not hearing about it secondhand, right there, watching his brother's life leave his body on the ground at a high school track meet on a Thursday morning in April. Think about that for a moment. Really sit with it. Your twin brother is on the ground. There is blood mixing with rainwater. Teenagers are screaming and running past you. You are 17 years old, and you are watching the person who has been beside you for every single day of your entire life slip away, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. That is the image that defines this case more than any surveillance footage or body camera recording or legal argument ever could. Emergency services were called. First responders reached the stadium. Austin Metcalf was transported from the scene. He did not survive. He was pronounced dead from a single stab wound to the chest. Karmelo Anthony did not flee far from the tent. He was detained near the edge of the stadium by responding police officers. They placed him in handcuffs, and a body camera mounted on one of those officers was recording the entire time. Every word Karmelo said in those raw, immediate minutes after dropping the knife was captured on audio and video. The prosecution would later describe those recorded statements as some of the most damaging evidence in the case. We will get to exactly what was said and why it matters shortly. 2 phone calls went out that afternoon. One to the Metcalf family telling them their son Austin was dead. One to the Anthony family telling them their son Karmelo had been arrested for murder. 2 families, connected forever by 2 minutes of confrontation, under a tent in a rainstorm, both entering a nightmare that will never fully end, regardless of what any jury decides. The trial began, and the courtroom became its own kind of pressure chamber. Austin's parents sat in the front row every single day. Hunter sat with them. The family that had lost its center of gravity positioned themselves as close to the proceedings as the law allowed, and they did not look away from any of it. Not the surveillance footage, not the witness testimony, not the legal arguments about whether their son's death was murder or the tragic result of lawful self-defense. They absorbed all of it with the kind of visible pain that makes an entire courtroom shift in their seats. The prosecution came out swinging from the first moment. Their theory of the case was built on a single concept, and they hammered it relentlessly. Intent. They told the jury this was not an accident, and it was not a panicked reaction. It was a deliberate, premeditated choice made by someone who had already decided how the confrontation was going to end before the first shove was thrown. They started with the tent. The prosecution argued that Karmelo chose to sit in the memorial team area when other sheltered locations were available. They did not frame this as an innocent teenager caught in the rain. They framed it as a conscious decision to position himself in a rival team's space. When he was asked to leave repeatedly and refused, the prosecution argued, he was not frozen by fear or blocked by the crowd. He was anchoring himself deliberately because he knew what was in his bag, and he was prepared to use it. They moved to the verbal challenge. Touch me and find out. The prosecution put those words in front of the jury and told them to listen carefully. That is not a plea for help, they said. That is not someone trying to avoid a fight. That is someone issuing a dare. Someone who has already decided that if the line gets crossed, the response will not be a shove back or a punch. It will be a knife. Then the prosecution spent significant time on the physical mechanics of the weapon itself, because this is where their argument gains its most visceral power. A 3.5-inch folding knife is not a fist. It is not a random object grabbed in the heat of the moment. Using it requires a specific, deliberate sequence of physical actions that cannot be performed accidentally or reflexively. You have to reach into the bag. You have to find the knife among your belongings. You have to pull it out. You have to manually open the blade and lock it into position so it does not fold back on your own hand. You have to establish a firm grip on the handle, and then you have to drive it forward into another human being's body with enough force to penetrate the chest. The prosecutor physically demonstrated this sequence for the jury, step by step, motion by motion, standing in front of 12 people and pantomiming the act of deploying a folding knife so that every person in that jury box could see and feel and understand that between the first shove and the fatal stab, there were multiple conscious decisions made, multiple moments where a different choice was available, multiple opportunities to stop. The district attorney looked at the jury and called it a sneak attack. Those two words settled over that courtroom like a weight. You could feel them land. And if you looked across the gallery at Hunter Metcalf sitting in the front row, you could see exactly what those words cost him. His brother, his twin, killed by what the state of Texas was formally calling a sneak attack. Over a seat, under a tent, in the rain, witness after witness took the stand. Teenagers who had been standing feet away when Austin fell. Kids who were now being asked to raise their right hand, swear an oath on a Bible, and describe in precise detail the worst thing they had ever seen. Their testimony was consistent on the key points. Karmelo was asked to leave many times. He refused. His hands were near or inside his backpack. The knife came out fast once physical contact began. Most of them did not even realize a blade had been used until Austin was on the ground. And then the prosecution played the surveillance footage. The courtroom went silent in the way that only a room full of people holding their breath can be silent. The video appeared on the screens, and the prosecutor walked the jury through it frame by frame, pointing at Karmelo's position, pointing at Austin's approach, pointing at the backpack, pointing at the moment everything collapsed into violence. The prosecution isolated a specific 10-second window within that footage and told the jury that this was the moment that eliminates any claim of self-defense. Their argument was precise. They said the footage shows Karmelo's hands moving into the backpack before Austin makes any aggressive physical contact. If that interpretation is correct, it means the knife was being accessed in preparation for the confrontation, not as a reaction to being struck. Under Texas law, that distinction is everything. Reaching for a weapon before you are attacked is not self-defense. It is premeditation. The body camera evidence came next, and the prosecution treated it as the final nail. In the minutes immediately after being handcuffed near the stadium edge, Karmelo Anthony made statements to the officers on scene. The body camera captured all of it. The prosecution argued that the tone and content of those statements were fundamentally inconsistent with someone who had just survived a terrifying, life-threatening attack. They were not the words of a traumatized teenager in shock, the state said. They were the words of someone who understood exactly what he had done and felt justified in doing it. The defense team did not sit quietly through any of this. They challenged every element of the prosecution's narrative with a counter-framework built on a fundamentally different reading of the same evidence. Their argument began and ended with one question. What would a reasonable person have believed standing in Karmelo Anthony's position in that moment? They started with the size disparity. Austin Metcalf outweighed Karmelo by more than 60 pounds. He was a football player. The defense argued that when a person of that size initiates physical contact with you in a confined space you cannot exit. The threat calculation is not theoretical. It is immediate and it is serious. A single punch from someone 60 pounds heavier can cause catastrophic injury. The defense wanted the jury to feel the physical reality of that imbalance every time they looked at the footage. They challenged the tent narrative. The storm was sudden and severe. Students ran for the nearest shelter they could reach. Framing a teenager's decision to duck under the closest available canopy as a provocative tactical choice, the defense argued, required ignoring the basic panic of a sudden downpour on an open field. He was not setting a trap. He was getting out of the rain. They challenged the escape narrative. The prosecution said Karmelo could have simply left. The defense said the physical layout made that functionally impossible without pushing through a hostile crowd into a dangerous storm. Telling a jury that someone should have just walked away is easy to say in a climate-controlled courtroom. It is a different calculation entirely when you are the one surrounded. They challenged the body camera interpretation. A 17-year-old in handcuffs, heart racing, adrenaline flooding his system, seconds removed from the most violent moment of his young life. Saying things that sound wrong to a calm observer does not constitute a confession. The defense argued that shock and adrenaline produce statements that sound nothing like what a person would say in a rational, composed state, and that interpreting those statements as proof of intent was fundamentally unfair, and they challenged the 10 seconds of surveillance footage directly. The defense argued that the camera angle, the distance, the crowd density under the tent, and the resolution of the institutional security system made it impossible to determine with certainty the precise sequence of movements in the frames the prosecution was relying on. What the state was presenting as definitive proof was, the defense said, an interpretation layered over ambiguous images. They told the jury that reasonable doubt lives in exactly that ambiguity, that if you cannot say with absolute certainty who moved first based on that footage, you cannot convict. The jury sat with all of it. The surveillance video played multiple times. The body camera audio played in full. The witness testimony from traumatized teenagers filled hours of court time. The prosecution's mechanical breakdown of the knife deployment, the defense's emphasis on the size disparity and the impossibility of retreat, the verbal challenge, the physical layout, the rain, the tent, the 10 seconds. All of it pointed in two different directions simultaneously. Austin Metcalf's family watched every moment of it from the front row. The parents who will never see their son graduate. Hunter, who held his twin brother on the ground and begged for an ambulance that arrived too late. Their presence in that courtroom was a constant silent testimony to the irreversible reality at the center of this case. No matter what the jury decides, Austin is not coming home. Karmelo Anthony's family sat through it as well. Their son, 17 years old, facing the possibility of spending decades in a Texas prison. His future compressed into a legal argument about 10 seconds of video footage and the meaning of words spoken during 2 minutes of chaos that no one planned and no one can undo. This case does not offer the comfort of simplicity. It is not a clean story about a villain and a victim. It is a story about two teenagers in a pressure cooker of circumstance, territorial instinct, physical threat, social pressure, and a sudden violent storm that forced everyone into spaces too small for the emotions they were carrying. The confrontation lasted 2 minutes. The stabbing took seconds. The consequences will last the rest of multiple lifetimes. Austin Metcalf deserved to walk out of that stadium with his twin brother that afternoon. He deserved to complain about the rain on the drive home and forget about the whole thing by dinner. He was 17 years old with an entire life waiting for him, and it was taken in a fraction of a moment. Karmelo Anthony was 17 years old too, and regardless of the legal outcome, regardless of whether 12 jurors ultimately see those 10 seconds as murder or self-defense, his life as he knew it ended under that same tent on the same Thursday morning. 2 families destroyed, 1 seat under a canopy, a storm that nobody asked for, and a 2-minute argument that nobody won. The verdict will answer the legal question. What it will not answer is the one that sits underneath everything else in this case. How does something this catastrophic grow from something as small as a teenager sitting in the wrong chair during a rainstorm? We are going to keep covering every development in this case as it moves through the court system. Every filing, every ruling, every piece of evidence that enters the public record will be broken down here with the same level of detail and fairness you just experienced. That is what this channel exists to do. If this video gave you a fuller understanding of what actually happened that morning in Frisco, take 1 second right now and hit the like button. It is a small thing, but it makes an enormous difference in helping this kind of in-depth coverage reach the people who are searching for it. And if you are not yet subscribed to Beyond the Verdict, fix that right now. We go deeper than anyone else on the cases that demand more than a headline, and we are just getting started with this one. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think the most critical piece of evidence in this case is. We read every single one, and the conversation in this community is what makes all of this worth doing.